Today's video is a compilation of your 20 favorite Dollar Tree fall DIYs. I hope you enjoy. We're using 3 of Dollar Tree's pizza pans. I originally mixed some brown acrylic paint with white chalk paint and painted the inside and top rim of each of these pans. Now when it dried, I did not like the color. It almost had like a purple tint to it. So I took the brown oxide acrylic paint and just went over each one of these with one coat, and that gave me a much nicer brown color. Now using 2 of those pans, we're going to be using some of Dollar Tree's gorgeous fall fabric. It has these beautiful white pumpkins on there. I'm going to use the bottom part of the pizza pan as a guide to lay my fabric out and draw and trace around that bottom portion of the pan, and then I can cut that out. I'm going to make sure everything fits, and then I'm going to fold that fabric in half and then cut it directly in the center, so I'll have 2 separate halves. That way we can save on our fabric rather than covering both pieces with an entire piece of fabric. Now once I know everything's going to fit and look really pretty on each side, I'm going to apply each piece of fabric to the pan using a thin layer of Mod Podge. I'm going to press that fabric down and really make sure those edges are pushed down and everything is tight and flat. And I'll do the exact same thing for the other pizza pan. Once that Mod Podge dries, I'm then going to take some of that same brown oxide paint and very carefully go around the rim to really straighten up those fabric edges. Once that paint dries, I'll then go over the entire painted portion only with a thin layer of Mod Podge. That's going to keep our paint from chipping off. And I also made sure to get that third pan that we did not add any fabric to. We will also be using one of Dollar Tree's beautiful fall signs. I originally cut the hanger off and fed on several different sizes of wood beads, and then fed that back through, knotted it, and secured it in place with some E6000, hot glue, and ribbon. This was originally going to be the hanger for my piece, but I'm going to change it a little bit later and you'll see why. But this we're going to be applying with E6000 to the pizza pan that did not have the fabric on it, our third pizza pan, and this would make a beautiful piece all by itself and have that gorgeous bead hanger. But we're actually going to be putting it on top of our other 2 pizza pans. So I'm using 3 tumbling tower pieces and attaching that to one side of the pan without the fabric using E6000 and hot glue, and then I will apply that to the top. We can add our second pan overlapping our first pan, and then we'll add 2 of the tumbling tower pieces right at the edge of the fabric. This is going to keep everything even and have a nice way to secure each pan to each other. Now on that second one, I am going to add some E6000 and hot glue to that outside edge, so when we add our centerpiece, it will have something to adhere to on that side and sit flat. Now this piece has a little bit of weight to it, so my hanger on the front is not going to work. Also, it's going to stick too far off of the wall, so I need to put my hanger on the back. So I just cut those flush to the front of the sign, and then I'll just restring these beads, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit longer than I originally did. I'm going to secure those to the back of the 2 pizza pans using the same method with the E6000 and hot glue. Then I'm going to cut 3 pieces of burlap fabric ribbon down to 14 inches and some white burlap from Walmart. I cut it down slightly shorter and cut that in half, and then 2 dark brown pieces of burlap from Dollar Tree. I'm going to crisscross the medium color and then apply the white burlap and then the dark burlap, and then put a piece of the medium color right on top. Using some jute rope, I'm going to tie that very tightly so we can create our messy bow. I'm going to dovetail each one of those ends at different lengths and leave your excess jute rope on there because you're going to need that later on. Now I'm going to create a little bit of a swag to go on top of that, and I'm using some of Walmart's picks, and they are gorgeous, but I want to be able to make mine have different lengths, so I cut all of the stems off the bundles and laid them out, and once I had them laid out the way I liked them, I'm going to attach those two stem pieces with some floral wire and just sit that right on top of my messy bow for right now. Using some buffalo check ribbon, I'm going to create a loop bow by creating the loop at the top and then a loop at the bottom. Then you'll just pull it over at an angle and create another loop. Do that again at the top, and I'll continue to do that until I have 3 loops on each side. Then I can pinch that together in the middle, cut my excess off, and we can add that directly to our other bow by wrapping that twine around each way and then double knotting that in the back. Now I have this buffalo check ribbon listed in my Amazon store in my description box if you're interested in that. Make sure to fluff out your bow really pretty. We're going to attach it right to the top of the center of the sign with a good amount of hot glue. Then I'm going to use one of Dollar Tree's wood stems, and I'll be attaching that right directly to the top of our messy bow, right there where the jute string is, and hold that in place. Starting off by using a Dollar Tree canvas, I'm going to use my heavy duty staple lifter, and I have this listed in my Amazon store in my description box below if you guys are interested. It just makes it really easy to lift each one of these staples, and then you can go back and pull them all off. Now we're going to remove the canvas from the frame, and this will become the backing now. So we're going to use the back side of our frame. That's going to be the front. And I am going to give this a light sanding just to make sure everything's nice and smooth. And I'm not going to paint this. I'm going to keep it that natural wood color. Then we're going to take our canvas and we're going to flip it over and make sure it's nice and flat. And then you can freehand this, or you can use a pumpkin of your choice, the size or shape that you like. This one came from Dollar Tree, and I love the shape of it. So I'm going to line that up at the bottom right of our canvas where that first lines are, where our frame is going to go back on, and then I can trace the outline of this in pencil. Then I'm going to be painting mine using an acrylic paint in the color khaki. And if you don't particularly like this color, you could go with a lighter or darker color, just depending on what you like. I'm going to carefully go around the outline and paint this, and then also paint the rest of the canvas. And if I need to, I will touch up a few areas. I like to go in 2 different directions to make sure that the canvas is fully covered. Now that our paint has dried, we're going to be taking some spackling. Now you can find this at any of your home improvement stores. This one is supposed to go on pink and dry white. Mine is a little bit older, so it's not as bright pink as it should be. But I'm going to take a putty knife and add a nice thicker layer on there, trying not to get to the edges yet. I'm just trying to add all of that in the center and also making sure that I don't go to the outside edge of our canvas. For the stem, I'm going to use a craft stick and kind of blend that in and go to the outline of our pumpkin. And then I'll also use that to go around the outline of the bottom part of the pumpkin. So it's very important that you don't add this spackling to the bottom and the right side edge of your pumpkin, because you don't want that to interfere with when you reapply your frame. I'm just going to use that craft stick to pull from the center until I get this around the entire outline. Once you have that spackling pushed up to the edge of your outline, take a putty knife and spread it around so you have a nice even coat across the pumpkin. Once you have that spread out, use the edge corner of your putty knife to create the grooves for the pumpkin, and it will pull it up to give it some more texture. Now, if you get a little bit too much on your putty knife, just wipe that off. And then for the center, because my putty knife is too wide, I'm going to use that craft stick to start creating the textured lines in the opposite direction. Then I'll finish the rest of the pumpkin using the putty knife because it gives me more texture. Now, if you get some clumps in there, don't worry about that. You can use your craft stick to blend that in, or even later, once it dries, you could sand it off. I'm going to check once more to make sure I don't have any of that spackling where the frame's going to go back to. If I do, I'm going to push that up because I don't want that to interfere with reapplying our frame. Now, I let mine dry overnight. Now that it is completely dry, we can reattach our frame. I'm going to use some Gorilla Hot Glue on the back side of the frame. Press that very firmly and make sure that my canvas is super tight as I'm pushing that down. Then to reinforce it, I will use some staples on the back side, and again, make sure that your canvas is pulled very tightly. To remove the excess canvas, I started off using a rotary blade. This one came from Dollar Tree. I do have to go back and use my utility knife just because I think my rotary blade is very dull and I probably just need to buy a new one. But we'll trim all of the outside edges of the canvas, and this project turned out so beautiful. We're using one of Dollar Tree's faux wood removable peel and stick wallpaper. We're also going to use one of their large wooden leaf hanging decor pieces, but you could also use a pumpkin. That would be really pretty. We're going to lay that on the back of our peel and stick wallpaper and trace it out with a marker, and then we're going to cut it. Now, it does take a little bit of time to cut it. You want to make sure you get all of those curves and edges and details, but when you're finished, it's so worth it because this is so pretty. Look how pretty that is. Now we're going to be using an 11 by 14 canvas board, but this would also look great on an actual canvas. Just my 11 by 14 canvas, the frame was not straight, so I'm going to use this canvas board. You'll want to take your time and be really careful pulling the backing off. I started at the very top and then placed that on my board and pressed it down. Then I turned it to the side so I could flip it over and remove the backing from some of the larger portions of the leaf on each side. It's just a little bit tricky because it's paper and you want to make sure that you're careful and that you don't tear it. But once you get past that larger section, it's easy to remove the backing and press this onto your canvas board. I decided to use my hair dryer on the high setting and go over it just to kind of heat that glue up, since this is removable wall tile, but it might not be a bad idea to put some Mod Podge underneath it. I also created a decal on my Cricut using the font Bickley Script Com. But if you don't have a Cricut, I do have this as a free printable on my website. All you have to do is go to the link in my description box below. It is a PDF file, so you can just download this at home, print it, and then trace it onto your project. For this project, we're using 2 of Dollar Tree's mini cutting boards. This is the barcode if you need that. We're also using one 3/4-inch wooden dowel. You'll need a drill bit the same size as your wooden dowel. I'm going to mark the center at the top of the handles for both of my cutting boards, and then set this on a piece of wood to protect my work surface. Drill a hole completely through the handle. Now mine went a little off center, so if yours does that, make sure that you line the other one up exactly the same way because you want your dowel to stay straight. I just held it over top of it and made a mark and then drilled my hole. We're going to cut our dowel down to 7 inches, and I'm using my miter box and handheld saw to do this. And then we're going to sand the end of that to make sure that it is flat. We're using one of Dollar Tree's wooden crates. We're going to attach each of the mini cutting boards, one to each end. And to do that, I'm using wood glue as well as a little hot glue. That hot glue will hold it in place until that wood glue sets up. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. We're going to take the dowel, we're going to put it into the hole that we just drilled on one of the mini cutting boards, and you will have to push it a little bit further so that you'll be able to get the other end in the other cutting board. Then I just used a hammer and tapped it down to make sure that they were flat on each end. So it should be looking something like this. I'm going to use some acrylic paint in the color Burnt Umber and paint this entire piece inside and out. I want mine to have a very rustic look, so once that dries, I'm going to use some glue as well as some white acrylic paint. I want to give it a chippy look. And in order to do that, you'll want to apply a generous amount of that regular glue and brush it on until it's smooth. While that glue is still wet, you'll take your white acrylic paint and brush an even layer of that over top of the glue. And then I'm using my hairdryer on the highest setting and slowly going over the paint. And as it dries, it's going to form the most beautiful crackled paint effect. I'm going to continue to do this for the entire piece, including the inside. Once that has dried, I want to decorate mine for fall by adding in some Spanish moss as well as some of these leaves and pumpkin filler from Dollar Tree. This project, we are using a plastic charger in the shape of a pumpkin. I've had this one in my stash for a couple of years, and I think it came from Family Dollar for $1. I'm giving it a coat of black chalk paint, and as I was painting, I decided to add a piece of floral styrofoam in the center because I know that I want to add some florals later on in the project. I'm going to continue to paint the top part of this charger as well as the floral foam with the black chalk paint to help blend it in a little better. Once that dries, I'm going to flip this over and create a hanger on the back using some hot glue, jute twine, and a couple of pieces of ribbon. I'm just going to place that ribbon over there to make sure my twine does not come loose. Then we're going to flip it back over. We're going to take some of Dollar Tree's nautical rope and hot glue this around the edges of the charger. I find that it is easier to work in small sections and hold the rope in place until the hot glue sets, and this will really take the shape of this pumpkin and give it a more defined and elevated look. Once we glue that last piece on, I realized that some of my chalk paint was chipping off, so I touched that up, and once it dried, I took some Mod Podge to seal this in. So if you recreate this, it would be much easier to Mod Podge over the paint before you add your nautical rope on. I did make sure I kept all of my strokes going outwards so that it would have the texture of a real pumpkin. Now we're going to decorate it with some Dollar Tree florals. This is a maple bouquet, and I'm going to cut those stems from the bundle and add them on the opposite corners of each other. So just kind of filling in some of those green leaves around some of those burnt orange burgundy leaves. We're also going to use some of Dollar Tree's eucalyptus as well as some of their multicolored, I believe these are like wheat stems. I'm going to add in a few of these to give it some extra height, and I'm going to add those on the corners as well as some of those sides. Then we can add in some of our eucalyptus until we get the fullness that we want. Then I want to create a bow to go in the center. I'm using some of Dollar Tree's floral mesh ribbon. They have these in several different colors, and they were in the nautical section over the summer. I'm going to cut down 3 strips of these and lay them in a crisscross pattern and lay this over top of some twine. Then I'm going to take this beautiful orange ribbon. This came from Dollar General. And we're going to cut this down to about 13 inches and dovetail each end. So you will need to cut 2 of these orange ribbons. And we're also going to use some of this beautiful ribbon from Walmart. And this is the 2.5-inch ribbon. We're going to cut that down to about 13 inches as well. And we will dovetail both ends of that, and you'll need 2 pieces of those. So now I'm going to crisscross my orange ribbon over top of that floral mesh, and then do the same thing with the leaf ribbon. Then I can wrap my twine around it, and the key thing here is to pull it very, very tightly so it bunches together in the middle, and then double knot it. Then I'm going to flip this over and double knot it again in the back. Then I can add this right on top of my floral foam using some hot glue. And then I want to add in a few of these gorgeous sunflowers from Dollar Tree. I cut the stems off the bundle, and I decided to add the yellow in the center and an orange one on each side. And then I had a few of these little mixed picks from Dollar Tree. I believe these came off of a pumpkin last year. These have the berries, and I'm going to add one at the top and one at the bottom. And I absolutely love how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For this quick and easy project, we're using one of these signs with the beaded hangers from Dollar Tree and some antique wax. I'm going to apply the antique wax to the frame and then take a wet wipe to blend it and spread it out. Don't forget to get the edges because sometimes these signs from Dollar Tree are not lined up straight. Once you have that completed, we're also going to use one of these wood word cutouts from Dollar Tree and apply the same antique wax and wipe that off. If you don't have a wet wipe, a wet napkin will do the exact same thing. We're also using a metal garden stake. You can find some at Dollar Tree, but this one actually came from Dollar General for $1. I'm going to wiggle that stake back and forth until it pops right out. And then this one had a tab on the back, so I'm going to take my 10 snips to cut that down and use some pliers to push it flat. We're going to take 2 of Dollar Tree's tumbling tower blocks as well as some Gorilla Super Glue to attach this to the back of our metal truck sign. If you've ever attached these wood pieces to the back of metal, they will not stay with just hot glue alone. You'll definitely need a permanent glue. To attach the tumbling tower blocks to the sign, you can use hot glue only. We're going to attach that in the center at the bottom. This is going to raise that truck up off of the sign, give it that 3D effect, and then we can add our woodward cutout to complete this project. We are using one of Dollar Tree's plastic cutting boards. Now, if you have ever tried to paint these before, the paint does not want to stick to it. So I am gently going over this with a fine grit sandpaper just to rough it up a little bit. Then I'm going to wipe that clean. I'm using a piece of gorgeous fall scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby. Line your design up where you want it to be, and using a craft stick, press firmly around the cutting board to create this indentation on the back. It's where the cutting board kind of sinks in just a little bit, and when you flip your paper over, you will easily be able to see where you need to cut it. Cut on the outside of that indentation, and I always like to make sure that it's going to fit before I go any further. I decided to paint my cutting board in a celery green chalk paint. Now, chalk paint will adhere better to this plastic than an acrylic paint. And I'm going to paint the handle as well as that raised portion on the outside and the edges with 2 coats. After allowing the paint to dry, I am applying a layer of Mod Podge right there where I want my scrapbook paper to be. You want to make sure you get it all the way to the edges. Then line your paper up and press it down firmly all the way around. To embellish this just a little bit, we're going to hot glue some twine around the handle and make it as thick as you want. Then we'll hot glue that in the back to hold it in place. Then I decided I wanted to take a piece of twine and tie a simple bow right in the front. Use a little bit of hot glue to make sure it stays in the center. Trim the ends down and add some natural wood beads to each of those ends of the bow. To hold that in place, you can use a little bit of hot glue if you cut your twine a little too short like I did. If not, you could just tie a knot at the end. You could leave it just as is, but I decided to trim it out with some twine right there where the scrapbook paper meets the cutting board. Using one of Dollar Tree's regular standard pizza pans and some white chalk paint, I'm going to paint the front center portion of this with 2 coats, allowing it to dry in between coats. Once that's dry, I'm going to take some Waverly chalk paint in the color Celery and give the outside top rim 2 coats of that as well. And when it dries, it is an absolutely gorgeous green color. Then, using some Dollar Tree nautical rope, I'm going to cut the end of that at an angle, and using some hot glue, I'm going to glue this to the inside top rim of the pizza pan. And I'm going to do this in small sections, holding it in place before I move to the next section. So my nautical rope is not flush with the bottom of the pan. It's actually glued to the inside top rim. So there's going to be a little bit of a space underneath that. And here is a close-up view of what I'm talking about. I have it flush with the outside rim. I'm going to continue to do that in small sections until I get all the way around. And then when I get to the other end, I'm going to cut it at an angle so that I can hot glue that to my previous angle and it will be seamless. But just in case it's not, you can always put that at the top part of your project because we're going to cover that up. Now, using one of Dollar Tree's beautiful fall signs, I'm going to remove the hanger and staples from the back of the truck part and then sand down the outside edges because sometimes they have little frayed pieces. Then I'm using 2 sunflower pick bundles from Walmart. And the sunflowers are absolutely gorgeous, but I'm not going to use them for this project, so I am going to set those to the side. Then I'm going to cut my bundles down right below where all of them join together. And then I'm going to overlap them end to end. And then I'm going to bend them to the shape of the top part of the pizza pan. Then to hold them together, I'm going to use some floral wire and wrap the entire center portion very tightly with that floral wire. And this is going to give it a nice strong hold. Now we're going to create a bow to go over top of our swag. I'm using some scrap burlap ribbon that I have, as well as this gorgeous fall ribbon from Walmart. I'm going to cut 2 pieces down to 9 inches and then the other 2 at 15 inches. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the leaf ribbon. So you'll have 2 of each at 9 inches and 2 of each at 15 inches. Using the longer ones first, I'm going to fold that down to create a loop at the top and leave a tail. Squeeze that together or pinch it together. Hold it with one hand. Do the exact same thing for the leaf ribbon. Place that beside it and continue to do that until I have all of those 4 long pieces together. So the 2 burlap will be opposite sides of each other as well as the leaves. Then the smaller ones, I'm just going to fold those in half to create one loop and pinch the bottom together. And I'm going to place the leaf behind the burlap and then the burlap behind the leaves until I have all 4 of those pinched together and placed together. And I'm holding them with one hand really tightly. And then to secure them all, I'm going to use a zip tie. So it's going to be looking something like this. And then you'll just wrap your zip tie around where you're holding all of your pieces together. Pull that tightly and cut that excess off. Then I'm going to pull the tails of the bow to the side so that the leaf ribbon will sit on top of the burlap. Then I'll cut each of those tails in a dovetail by folding it over and then just cutting it at an angle. And I am going to cut the leaf ribbon shorter so the burlap will stick out behind that a little bit and you'll be able to see that. I'll do that for both tails on each side. Then I'm going to fluff that bow out really pretty. And I'm going to set that to the side for just a second. I'm going to use one of these wood word cutouts from Hobby Lobby. You can get a package of 6. This one was $3.99, but I do believe they were on sale. I am painting this with a watered down brown acrylic paint to give it a beautiful stain, and then I'll set that aside and let it dry. Now at the top where your 2 rope pieces meet, we're going to attach our swag using a good amount of hot glue to hold that right above the rope, and then our bow will sit down inside of the pizza pan and kind of cover up those sections. And I put a really good amount of hot glue there to make sure the bow stays in place, and then kind of fluff your tails out to the side. Now we can add that beautiful truck. I centered it up and put it a little bit more towards the bottom so that the bow wouldn't cover it up. And how perfect is that celery colored paint to match this gorgeous truck. I'm holding that in place with hot glue, and then using the word thankful, I'm going to hot glue it directly to the back of the truck. You can display this on a plate stand, or you can add a hanger to the back like I'm showing you here. I'm going to use a plate stand with mine, so for video purposes, I'm just using hot glue, jute rope, and some ribbon, but I do recommend that you put some E6000 on there to hold that jute rope in place to really make sure your hanger doesn't come off of the back. If you like more of the neutral fall colors, then this is definitely the project for you. I think it turned out absolutely gorgeous, but I'd love to know what you guys think. I'm using 2 of these Dollar Tree decor pieces. They look like small wooden pallets. For the first one, I'm going to be using a spiced pumpkin acrylic paint and one of those brushes from Dollar Tree, and dry brush over this entire palette. So it depends on how dark you want yours. I did want some of the wood to show through, so I'm going to go over this in one direction, let that paint dry, and then I can add my second coat. So now I'm adding my second coat just to darken it up a bit, but again, it just depends on how dark you want yours. For the other palette, I'm going to use an acrylic paint in the color Celery Green, and I'm going to do that in the exact same way. Now that the paint is dry, we're going to embellish these. I'm going to use some burlap trim from Dollar Tree on the green one. And I'm going to place that at the top and the bottom. And I found that it was easier if you place a little bit of glue, let that set so you can pull this ribbon really tightly on each side. Then I can flip that over to the back side and glue those 4 pieces down. I measured about an inch from the top and an inch from the bottom. Look how pretty that is. Now for the orange one, we're going to take some twine and again measure from an inch from the top, and I'm going to wrap that around the top about 4 times, tack that down with some glue on the back, and do the exact same thing at the bottom. I'm trying to make sure that I keep the twine as straight as possible, and then I will add a little bit more glue in the back just to make sure it stays in place. During the fall season, you can usually find these wood stems at Dollar Tree. I'm going to hot glue one to the top of each of these pieces, but if you can't find them, you could always use a branch out of your yard. I found this beautiful metal pumpkin that has a grateful tag on it for $1 at Dollar General, and the metal leaf that says Hello Fall. I thought these would be perfect to add around the stem on each of our pumpkins. Now I did want to hot glue the tag down to make sure it stayed in place, and if you need to adjust the height on it, you can just pull the hanger on the back and hot glue that. I think this metal color is absolutely gorgeous on these 2 pieces. For this project, we're using a palette sign from Dollar Tree's Plus section for $3 and a stencil from Hobby Lobby. This is a pack of 2. One has a pumpkin and the other one has some leaves on it. I'm going to use some painter's tape to make sure that my stencil stays in place, and use a white acrylic paint and a sponge dauber to apply the paint to the stencil. Now in some of those thin areas where the ribs of the pumpkin are, you do have to hold those down just to make sure that you don't get any paint underneath that. Also during the fall season, Dollar Tree carries these wood word cutouts. They match perfectly with the color of our palette. So now that the paint is dry on our pumpkin, we can just hot glue this right to the center of our sign, and you have a gorgeous piece for less than $5. We're using one of Dollar Tree's self-adhesive wall tiles. They have several different patterns. We're going to flip that over to the back side and also use one of Dollar Tree's pumpkin-shaped signs. This one has a metal leaf, so I did remove that, but I am going to save it and reattach it later. You'll also want to remove the hanger, and then using a marker, go around and trace your pumpkin shape out. Now, if you've ever used these tiles before, you'll know that once you cut them, all the layers will come apart. We're only going to use the top layer, which is the tile portion, but you could always save the back of that to create something else later on. Now we're going to attach this to our sign, so we're just going to flip this over and flip our sign over because we're going to attach it to the back side. To do that, I'm going to use some hot glue. I decided to do the hot glue just at the top portion because I didn't want it to cool off before I could attach the entire tile piece. So once you get that set on there, you can just turn it to the side, pull it up, and then hot glue the rest of it down. That way everything was lined up and I didn't have to rush to hurry up and get the glue on there. Then I'm going to take a stiff paintbrush, go over the entire piece to make sure I remove any glue strands before painting. I'm going to use one of Dollar Tree's small sponge daubers, some white chalk paint. I'm going to dip that down into the paint and then dab it all over my paper plate to make sure that I get a nice even amount of paint on there, and then very gently go over all of the raised portions to bring out that beautiful detail on this tile. Now you don't have to do white paint. You could do whatever color you choose. I think orange or green or brown, all of those would be very beautiful. Periodically, I do have to dab my dauber back into the paint just to get enough on it to do the next section. And if it's not dark enough with the paint, you may have to add 2 coats. This is how mine is looking after 2 coats. Now we can set it to the side and let it dry. To give it some more detail on the outside, I'm using some of Dollar Tree's nautical rope. I like to hot glue the ends to make sure they don't unravel. And then I'm going to start at the side of the stem and hot glue this around the entire pumpkin. I like to do this sections at a time just to make sure that the rope will take the shape of the pumpkin and stay in place. Using the metal leaf that came off of the pumpkin, I'm going to give this 1 coat of white chalk paint, and then once that dries, I'm going to take a pair of pliers to bend the end over to create like a little curl at the end, and then I'll push that off to the side. And I decided to take my finger sander and gently go over this to bring out some of the green that's underneath to give it more of a distressed look. I'm using some raffia that I found on Amazon, and I have that in my Amazon store. The link to that is in my description box below if you're interested, but the hula skirt from Dollar Tree will also work. I just pulled a length off. I didn't measure it. I'm just going to keep folding that over until all of it is folded. Then I'll take an extra piece of the raffia to tie in the center. Then I'll take that leaf and tie the raffia around the stem. I'm also going to add a little bit of hot glue to make sure that it stays in place. And then I'll trim the raffia down as well as cut all of those loop pieces so it kind of looks like a messy raffia bow. Then I'm going to attach that to the stem of our pumpkin, and I decided to use some of Dollar Tree's burlap trim ribbon, and I'm going to create a sweet little bow with some long tails. I'm going to tie that together with a piece of raffia and then roll the raffia ends around a paintbrush to create some curls. Then we can attach that to the center of our bow on our pumpkin, and this project is finished. For this project, we are using one of Dollar Tree's 14-inch wire wreath forms, as well as a roll of their burlap. Start on the back side of your wreath form. You do not even need to secure it down with any glue yet. Just hold it tightly as you wrap it around the wreath form. You want to wrap it around about halfway of each piece of burlap until you get the entire wreath form covered. This should only take 1 roll of burlap. However, I had an open pack, so I started using that pack, and I did run out before I got to the very end. I did secure the end of that with some hot glue. Make sure you do that on the back side so that you don't see it. Then you can start your new roll and continue to wrap it until you have the wreath form covered. Secure that last piece with some hot glue, and this will hold the original piece that you started with. Once you cut your excess burlap off, flip it back over so that the front is now facing you. I'm decorating this with some gorgeous pumpkin maple bushes from Dollar Tree. They have 2 miniature pumpkins as well as some berries. You may want to look over your picks before you buy them because a couple of mine did not have the berries on there. I guess they fell off. We're going to cut each of the stems from the bundles. For each of the picks with the pumpkins, I'm going to push the leaves upwards and then bend the pumpkin so that when I apply it to the wreath, it will sit up like this. I'm starting off with one set of leaves. You can pull the stems out of these and attach just the two leaves. I do find later on that it's just easier to cut the stems down shorter. They'll sit in there better. You can tuck these into where the ribbon overlaps and then secure it with a little bit of hot glue. I started off the first one with two of the leaves, then I add in my pumpkin stem, making the leaves on that stem have the colors on the opposite sides. Add a little bit of hot glue and push the ribbon down around the stem. Then we'll go to the next section where the ribbon overlaps and add in a couple of leaves. As I go through this, I'm going to twist the leaves around and make sure that they are kind of intertwined with each other. For each section of the wreath form, I'm adding a stem with two leaves, a stem with the pumpkin and two leaves, then a stem with two sets of two leaves, and I'll add another set with the pumpkin and two leaves. Then the stem with the berries. Now, if yours comes to a section where it doesn't overlap like mine did, where I had to add that extra burlap ribbon, the burlap is very forgiving. You can just push your stem directly through and add a little bit of hot glue to make sure it stays in place. This one section here is one of the Dollar Tree bundles. I did use 6 bundles in total. You'll continue to create your pattern until you have all of your bundles attached to your wreath form. Then go back in and twist and fluff out all of your leaves, and I used that 7th bundle if I saw any bare spots that I thought needed some more leaves or any extra pumpkins. I love the pastel colors in this wreath, and I think it turned out absolutely beautiful. I'm going to start by using 3 of these styrofoam pumpkins from Dollar Tree. These are the ones that have the clips on the bottom. I've already removed all of the clips, and now I'm going to remove all of the stems. Then I'm going to take pieces of Dollar Tree barbecue skewers to insert into the bottom of each of these pumpkins to make it a lot easier for me to paint. I'm going to paint 2 of these with 2 coats of white chalk paint. And the third one, I will give that 2 coats of Waverly's chalk paint in the color Celery. Now, once these have dried, I'm going to take the paintbrush that I used for the Celery chalk paint, dip that into a little bit of water and wipe most of the excess water off, and then dab the paintbrush to create the celery colored speckles on the top of the white pumpkins. For the celery pumpkin, I watered down some black paint, and I'm doing the same thing. Now, once that dried, it was a little too dark for me, so I'm going to dry brush some celery paint over each of those speckles. Using a brown chalk paint in the color Truffle, I'm going to paint each one of the pumpkin stems to make them look more realistic and less like plastic. Then, using 3 of Dollar Tree's berry picks, remove the leaf from the pick. And because I want these to be white to match our inspiration piece, I'm going to paint over these with some white chalk paint. You could also spray paint these. I do find that it is easier if you saturate your brush with some water as well as the white paint and dab it into the berries. Let that side dry, then flip over and do the back side. Now, I found this beauty at Family Dollar for $5, but Dollar General also sells like some blank tobacco baskets for around $3. They're a little bit smaller than this one. This one measures 10 inches by 10 inches, and as beautiful as it is, I want to recreate that Kirkland's piece. So I'm going to remove all of the embellishments they have inside of the basket, and then the sign that it came with, I am going to paint that with 1 coat of white chalk paint. Now, one side of it was white, but it was a shiny white, and I want mine to be more of a matte finish. Then this is totally optional, but I am distressing the outside edges with some brown acrylic paint to kind of bring the outline of that out. And then I'm using one of Hobby Lobby's wood word cutouts. Because it was slightly smaller to fit in my basket, I decided to add it to the sign that was originally in the basket using some hot glue. Then we can place this back inside of the tobacco basket using some Gorilla Hot Glue. We'll set that to the side for a moment. I'm going to be using some of this eucalyptus garland from Dollar General. This long piece was $3. And I'm going to take that end piece and feed it through the left side of my basket and pull all of those leaves through, and then take that end piece and go through the opposite side of the basket and pull that more towards the back. Then I'll take that and fold it over to the side to double it up. So I'll cut that excess off. And this is the same eucalyptus that we used in the previous project, so it's a pretty long piece. Going above the original section on the tobacco basket, I'm going to pull the eucalyptus garland through and then pull some of the leaves through each of those sections and do that around from one side to the other. Then using some floral wire from Dollar Tree, I'm going to feed that through the back side of the basket and attach the eucalyptus strands to that. Once I tighten that up, I will wrap it around the tobacco basket again and then feed it through the other side and then push it through the wire piece that's already attached to the basket and tighten it up again. This is just going to give it some added security. Then I like to tuck the end piece in and push it down to make sure it's not going to scratch anything. For the loose strands in the front, take a piece of floral wire and feed that between the strand and the pieces in the tobacco basket, and do the same thing by twisting it, cutting the excess, and then tucking that end piece down. You'll do this in several areas to secure the eucalyptus to the basket, and then we can hot glue our pumpkins in. Make sure that you're hot gluing them to the actual basket and not just the leaf. And you can rearrange some of your leaves around to make sure that they're not covering up the sign at the top. If you need to see that you need to add a few more pieces of floral wire, then you can do so, and then hot glue your third pumpkin in. Then I like to add the berries to make sure I like the placement of them. Then I can flip it over, and on the back side, secure those stems to the basket as well. And then I do wrap that floral wire around each of the stems just to make sure that they are secure and they're not going to fall out. Then I'm going to roll the end of that in to tuck it to make sure that it's flat, and so that it will sit flat against your door or your wall. And I'm using some of Hobby Lobby's white flowers, but you could also use some of Dollar Tree's baby's breath. You could hot glue these in, but the stems were long enough that I could twist them around just like I did the berries and secure them in the back with some floral wire. Now all we have to do is create a hanger using some twine, and I'm going to feed the ends through the loop, double knot it at the end, and cut that excess twine off. Project, we're using 3 wooden ovals that have this nice, beautiful beveled edge. You can find these at Dollar Tree. The first thing we're going to do is remove the tags from the back, and I find that it is easiest if I heat it up with my hairdryer first. We're going to start off by placing 2 of those side by side. I'm using a ruler to make sure that all 3 of them will be lined up at the bottom. We're going to attach these pieces together using some Gorilla super glue as well as some hot glue. Just trying to make sure I don't mix the hot glue with the super glue. Then we can set our third piece right in the center, again making sure it is lined up at the bottom so that it will be able to set up on its own. I'm going to start off by painting this piece with a brown acrylic paint in the color Coffee Bean. I'm going to make sure I get the entire piece. You may find it easier to paint your pieces and then glue them together, but we're going to be creating a crackle finish on this, and I wanted to glue mine together first to make sure that the glue would adhere well and then paint it. After that first coat, I'll set it to the side and let it dry. Once dry, you're going to pick out a color for your top coat. I'm using an acrylic paint in the color Burlap. I'm also going to use some Elmer's school glue. We're going to apply a generous amount of glue to the top of that center oval. Now I want to be kind of careful because I don't want the crackle finished on the beveled edges. I want to keep those that coffee bean color, but if you want the crackled effect on your entire piece, you could just put the glue all over there. So I'm going to do this sections at a time, starting with the center oval, and I'm trying to be careful not to go outside of those edges. Depending on how big you want your crackles to be, or the cracks in your paint, will determine how much glue you want to put on there. Now I started off with a separate brush for the glue as well as the paint. I'm trying to keep a nice even coat of paint over top of the glue while the glue is still wet. Then get out your hair dryer, set it on the highest setting, and just slowly go over the top edge of it just to blow that hot air on there, and it's going to create the most gorgeous crackle effect. Now you don't want to leave your hair dryer on there too long, then it will create bubbles. Look how beautiful that is. Now I'm going to use that same technique on the other two pieces. Allow time for your paint and glue to completely dry. I'm going to let mine dry overnight, and then I'll touch up those edges with that coffee bean paint. Now that everything's dry and I've touched up all the edges, I'm going to add a stem using this half of wooden piece. This came from Hobby Lobby. It's like one of those pieces that you could wrap a candle with that has Velcro on the back, but a branch out of your yard would work just the same. Once I have all of that Velcro and glue removed, I'm going to flip this over and attach it right in the center using some super glue and a little bit of hot glue. That hot glue is going to give you that temporary hold until that super glue sets up. Now it's time to embellish the top of it. I'm going to use some 2.5-inch wired ribbon as well as a pipe cleaner and some raffia. I just cut a length of that ribbon down, put the raffia on top. I'm going to pinch it in the middle and attach that together with the pipe cleaner, twist it really tightly in the back. Then I'm going to cut another piece of that ribbon, pinch it down at the bottom, and wrap my pipe cleaner around that so it's sort of like in the center. Now you could certainly use some hot glue or twine, but I want to be able to change my ribbon out if I want to. I don't want to permanently attach it to our pumpkin. I'm also going to use a couple of leaves on a stem, and this came from a Dollar Tree pick. It fits perfectly right in between those two ovals, and then if you twist your pipe cleaner really tightly at the bottom, you can put that on the other side and then spread your ribbon out. Now you could leave it as is, but I decided to dovetail each end of the ribbon just to give it more of a finished look, and this is how it turned out. so excited to find this wood sign at Dollar Tree. It has a nice raised pumpkin on it. I'm going to remove the hanger but save it so I can reattach it later. I want to give mine more of a stained look, so I am mixing some acrylic paint in the color coffee bean down with water. I'm going to go over this entire piece, including all of the inside edges of that pumpkin. Then I'll take a dry paper towel and kind of dab any of the excess water off. You'll still be able to see the engraving on the sign. It's just a very light stained looking color. Once that dries, we're going to take some white chalk paint and a Dollar Tree dauber to go over the raised portion of that pumpkin. It's really going to pop on that wood. I created a couple of decals using my Cricut. I know not everybody has a Cricut, so I do have these as a PDF file. It's a free printable on my website. You can go to my website, download it, print it at home, and trace it onto your project. Now we can reattach our hanger back onto our sign. I want to make a messy bow for mine, so I'm going to take a piece of twine, some dark burlap, some of that white mesh that you could find at Dollar Tree, some plaid ribbon. I'm going to go ahead and dovetail the ends of the burlap, trim that mesh down to about the same size as the burlap. Also dovetail the ends of the plaid, and I'm going to add some green and orange ribbon, and I went ahead and dovetailed the ends of those. Pinch it together in the middle and then hold it together with a piece of twine by double knotting that on the back. Using some of Dollar Tree's white ribbon with the pumpkins on it, I made a small bow to attach to the center in the front. I thought it would really bring out the white on the sign itself. I'm going to double knot that on the back, cut the excess off, and then we can attach this to the top of our sign using some Gorilla Hot Glue. I put mine off to the side of the hanger just a little bit. This project was inspired by this beautiful metal sign from Dollar Tree. I'm going to remove the hanger. I don't need it on this project. And I'm going to pull some of those colors out. I'm going to be using brown oxide that's going to match the trim. And then celery will go really well with our leaves. And then I'm using a spiced pumpkin. We're going to be making a clothespin wreath. You can get a 36 count clothespin pack from Dollar Tree. We will need 48 for this project. I find that it is easier to leave them on the cardboard to paint them. I am not going to go for a full coverage paint. I want mine to have a little bit of a rustic look to it. So I'm only going to paint the tops and then the top part of the back of the clothespin as well as the sides. I want some of that bare wood to peek through. So I am painting 16 in the brown, 16 in the spiced pumpkin, and 16 in the celery. We're also going to be using one of these brass wreath rings from Dollar Tree. They come in a set of 3. We're going to use the smallest one for this. Take a piece of twine and double knot it on each end to create a hanger. And just depending on how long you want your hanger as to how long you cut your twine. Make sure to cut your excess ends off. Now that the paint is dry on our clothespins, we can add these to the ring. I'm adding it to the smallest hole, which is closest to the pin in the middle. I'm adding mine in the pattern of brown, pumpkin, and then celery. I'm going to continue to do this. When I get to the hanger, I'm just going to make sure that I push it very tightly between the 2 clothespins so that when you hang it up, it's going to go in between the middle of those clothespins and you'll barely see it. Continue to do this pattern until you have all of your clothespins on your ring. Now I did have 3 left over, so technically it only takes 48 clothespins for that small ring. I'm going to trim down that raffia bow and then hot glue one piece just to kind of cover up those holes and blend them in so they won't be as noticeable. And then to add the sign to the front of our clothespin wreath, I'm using some E6000 and hot glue. I do recommend that you clamp this and let that E6000 set up. Or in my case, I set a piece of wax paper down and then set something heavy on top of it to make sure I had a good bond to those clothespins. This project, we're using one of Dollar Tree's round-shaped cutting board signs. Remove the raffia bow as well as the sticker on the back. They really had that on there good. I had to use my putty knife to get that off. And then I made sure that I sanded it to make sure all the glue was removed. Then clean up any of that debris so we can prep this for paint. I'm going to paint mine with 2 coats of that burlap color. It's going to give it a nice base. We're going to let that completely dry, and then we're going to use some of Dollar Tree's fall fabric. They have some really beautiful colors out. I'm going to use this plaid. We're going to fold that in half, set this on the handle of the cutting board. Then we're going to fold that up about a half an inch, maybe an inch, to create a faux seam. Crease that across, and then right there at the edge of the cutting board, we're going to fold this so that the fabric will go behind the cutting board. So on the back side, it's going to look like this. We're going to attach it using some hot glue just at the bottom for right now, just to make sure that we can hold that in place. And if you haven't guessed already, we are making a scarecrow. So I'm going to glue some raffia on each side. Then I decided to give it a few bangs. I'm going to glue all of that raffia underneath and then trim it up a bit to make sure everything's nice and straight. I can then go back and glue that faux seam down in the front to make sure it stays in place. And right where the handle starts to form at the top of this, that's where you'll want to gather all of your fabric together. We're going to triple knot that and then tie a bow right in the front, trim the tails down just a little bit, and then we can go to the back side and make sure that we glue pieces of that over top of the handle so it keeps it covered. Then we can trim any loose strands that are at the top of our fabric. I'm going to use a pencil to draw out the face, and then if I make a mistake I can just erase it. Then I can use a Sharpie to create the outline where I made all of my pencil marks. Then I can fill in all of those areas with some acrylic paint. Decided to use one of Dollar Tree's burlap flowers and hot glue that to the hat, and this is how it turned out. For this project, you could use one of Dollar Tree's small wired wreath forms that comes in a pack of 2 and some of their garland or picks to create a small wreath. In my craft room, I already have this candle ring, and I've had it for quite a few years now. It's just one of those floral rings that you would set a pillar candle down in the middle. So I'm going to use this as my miniature wreath, as well as one of these wood palette signs, which you can find at Family Dollar. Dollar Tree also sells wood palette signs in their plus section. I'm going to set that wreath right in the center, take a marker and make a mark at the top and bottom of the ring at the top as well as at the bottom part, so that I'll be able to drill 4 holes. This is what we're going to be using to secure our wreath to the palette sign. We're also going to use some floral wire. I'm going to cut 2 lengths of that and just feed one end of each of those into those 2 holes and pull it to the front. So you'll have your 4 pieces sticking in the front so that we'll be able to attach that wreath a little later on. Now before we do that, I do want to add this gorgeous wooden pumpkin that I found at Dollar General for $1, and I want to put that in the center of our wreath. It matches perfectly with this wood palette, and to attach that I'm going to take 2 more pieces of floral wire, create a seat at the bottom when I fold it up, and hot glue these on the edges on the back side of this pumpkin and hold them there until the hot glue cools so that the wire is standing straight up. So once it cools, it's going to look something like this, and we're going to use that to attach to the wreath form on each of the sides. So we'll just wrap the floral wire around each side of that wreath form, twist it really tightly, make sure you got a good secure hold, then you can cut the excess floral wire off. And I always like to take a pair of pliers to make sure that I've twisted it tight enough, but also to be able to tuck that extra wire down so it doesn't scratch the surface that you're putting it on. Then we can place this directly on the palette using the 2 pieces of floral wire that we've already put on there. We're going to do it the exact same way we did with the pumpkin, and that is by wrapping it around the wreath form at the top and the bottom, twisting it really tightly, cutting the excess, and then twisting it down to make sure that the wire's not sticking out or poking up. Then you'll want to go back in, fluff all of your florals and leaves out and adjust them. And I think this just turned out absolutely gorgeous, but I would love to know what you guys think. I'm using a piece of burlap that I already had in my craft room. It was kind of shoved in a drawer, so it is really wrinkled up. I'm going to go over it with my iron to try to get this as flat as possible, because we're going to be using one of these faux wood chargers. You can find these at Dollar Tree and also Dollar General and Family Dollar. We're going to be placing this on the center of our charger, and I'm just going to tape 4 places down just to keep that burlap from moving around, so I can take a Sharpie and go around the inside of the charger and draw out our circle. Then I'll be able to cut this down. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, and it doesn't matter about the marker on there, because once you flip it over you won't see it on the other side, and we're also going to add a little something to that. I always like to make sure it's going to fit first. Then we're going to take some Mod Podge, add that all over the inside bottom part of this charger so that we'll be able to place our burlap fabric piece on top of that, and then we'll press all of the edges down as well as the center to make sure it gets a nice seal with the Mod Podge. And then I'm just going to take a paper towel to wipe any of the excess Mod Podge off. Let that dry for just a little bit, and then we're going to take some Dollar Tree nautical rope. I like to glue the ends together so that they don't unfray and come apart. We're going to glue that right where the fabric meets the charger, right there at the edge. One option for the next step is to use one of Dollar Tree's metal words. Now, if you do this, you may want to attach this to the burlap before you put the nautical rope on because it's a little bit longer, or you could cut the lettering down a little bit on the ends. I'm going to be using this wood word, which is super thick. It comes from Hobby Lobby, and you can usually catch these when they're on sale. I'm going to leave it in that natural wood color and hot glue it directly to the burlap. And I also have this floral pick that came off of a previous project. I love the colors in it. And you could easily make something very similar with some Dollar Tree picks. I'm going to remove the sunflower and replace it with a pumpkin that I pulled off of another Dollar Tree pick and just hot glue that directly where the sunflower was. Then I can hot glue this off to the side, and I did have to go back and add a little bit of permanent glue under there just to make sure it stayed in place. This project, we're using this gorgeous cutting board that you can find at Dollar Tree in their plus section for $3. It's very thick and nice quality. I want to be able to use both sides, so I'm going to carefully remove the embellishments and the labels because I still want to be able to use that front side and have this as a two-sided piece. On the back side, I'm going to very carefully paint that with one coat of an acrylic paint in the color Burlap. And then I'll set that to the side and let it dry. I was very careful not to get it on the outside edges, so now that it's dry, you can definitely use this on either side depending on how you want to style it. So we're going to add a layer of Mod Podge to that dried paint, and I did go over the entire surface because I want to make sure everything has the same finish. We'll allow that Mod Podge to dry, and we're using a beautiful fall napkin. I found this at Hobby Lobby. Remove all of the back layers so you're only left with the top layer. Now that the Mod Podge is dry, we can center our napkin on the cutting board. Look out for the wording. A lot of the napkins have some wording on it, so I'm trying to make sure that I line mine up where the wording will not be on the cutting board. Then we're going to take a piece of parchment paper, lay that over the napkin, and go over this with our iron to adhere the napkin to the Mod Podge. I have mine set on, I believe, 335, and I'll just go over this very gently, just long enough for that glue to heat up and adhere this to our cutting board. Once that's cooled down, I'm going to take my finger sander and go in one direction to remove the excess napkin on each side. This is going to give us that really beautiful crisp edge. You may want to then add another layer of Mod Podge over top of this to protect your napkin. I'm going to be using a dark brown acrylic paint in the color Coffee Bean and a dry brush to very gently go around all of the edges of the cutting board as well as the napkin. This is just a personal preference. I like a little bit of that distressed look, but if you don't like that, you can just skip this part. Using some Dollar Tree nautical rope, I'm going to glue the ends together and then measure out the width of the cutting board and then glue that end together to keep it from coming apart so that I can glue this right at the edge where the napkin meets the board. And I'll do the exact same thing at the top. To me, it just gives it a little bit more character and a little bit more rusticness. Because we didn't wrap the rope around the sides, you can still use that back side. Now I want to create a big fluffy bow, so I'm going to use some 2.5-inch wired burlap ribbon. It's cut to about 16 inches, and I'm going to create a 4.5-inch loop. I'm going to hold that together with some of those Dollar Tree clamps, and I'm making 4 of these. I'm also using some plaid ribbon that I found at Dollar General. I'm going to cut this just a little bit shorter than my burlap and make 1 to set on each of the burlap pieces. These clamps are so helpful to hold all of these loops together and pinch them right in the middle. I'm also going to use some 1.5-inch green ribbon. I believe this came from Dollar General as well. I am going to cut that a little bit shorter, make the loop a little bit smaller, and I'm going to put that on 2 pieces and use an orange ribbon to put on the other 2 pieces. During the summer season, you can find this mesh type ribbon at Dollar Tree. So I'm going to cut 2 of those down, and I'm going to pinch that just in the middle. I'm not going to make a loop, and I'm going to add that to the bottom of one of the orange ribbons and the bottom of one of the ones that has the green ribbon. And then I'll take some Dollar Tree lace, create another loop, and add that to the other 2 pieces. To hold them all together, I'm going to use a couple of zip ties. I'm going to take one of the bundles and then take the second bundle and kind of go in the opposite direction. Place a zip tie around that, pull it really tightly, and then I'll do the exact same thing for the other 2 bundles. Once I cut that excess zip tie off, then we can attach those 2 pieces together. Just make sure that when you add your zip tie that you have this wrapped around where all those loops meet, because you don't want your loops to come apart. I pulled some of the tails and loops apart to see exactly how I wanted to add the second bundle to the first bundle. Then I can just take another zip tie. So it's probably best if you add this zip tie in before, because I had a little bit of difficulty putting that underneath the first one. Then we'll wrap that first bundle around the second bundle. And it's going to look like a hot mess, but you just have to keep working with it and pulling the loops and the tails apart and separating everything. I'm going to take 2 brown pipe cleaners, twist the ends together, and then wrap those ends around each other to make one long pipe cleaner. Since I don't want to attach the bow permanently to the cutting board, I want to be able to switch it from the front to the back. We're going to use these 2 pipe cleaners to do that. Once you wrap that pipe cleaner around the bow, twist it a few times to make sure it's nice and tight, but leave the tails of that pipe cleaner on there. I decided to dovetail each end of the ribbons just to give it a nice elegant look. So once I have all of those done, we're going to attach this to the top of the cutting board with those pipe cleaners and twist it around right there where the handle is. Then you can just tuck the ends down so you can switch it from front to back. Again, you've got to go back and adjust those tails and loops how you want your bow to look. I hope you enjoyed today's video and found tons of fall inspiration on a budget. If you haven't subscribed already, I would love for you to click that subscribe button right below the video. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Please take care, and I'll see you guys next time.